Hello, I hope you guys are all doing well, and I hope you had a good time doing your 5 paragraph essay. Since I won't be able to be there this week, I wanted to just kind of cover some of the things that we had talked about and give you another way to study for your test. Just a reminder, you can use all of the things on your eClass pages, and also I highly recommend that you make your own sort of thing. So don't just do the notes that we give you, but find a way to make this meaningful to you. All right, so the first video, we're going to talk a little bit about the cells. And cell theory is a good place to start because that's sort of where we get all of our ideas about cells and discovery and all that stuff. So the first thing that cell theory says is that all living things are made of cells. If it doesn't have a cell, it's not alive. If it's alive, it's going to be made of cells. So all living things are made of cells. The second thing cell theory says is that cells are the basic building block of life. So cells are definitely made up of other things. They're made up of atoms and molecules, like you're going to find out next year in 8th grade. But once you break a cell apart, all of a sudden it's no longer alive. So even though there are smaller pieces, the smallest piece of life is the cell. Sort of like at school, the school is made of cinder blocks, but if we broke the cinder blocks down into their components, into the different molecules like water and other stuff that goes into making them, those don't make buildings. Those aren't the building blocks. The cinder blocks are the smallest building block of the school. Finally, cells come from other cells, and this just kind of makes sense. Just like people come from people, and dogs come from dogs, and cats come from cats. Cells come from other cells, right? Cell doesn't just come out of thin air. Cells come from other cells. So when we talk about cells, we have two basic types of cells. First of all, the biggest category, we've got prokaryotes and eukaryotes. We're really mostly going to focus on eukaryotes because you are a eukaryote, right? You have eukaryotic cells. And so eukaryotes, the big thing about them is they have a nucleus, which you can see from both of our cells right here. That's their nucleus. A prokaryote will not have a cell, and it's not going to look as organized as this. You're going to see things floating all over the place. You're going to see the DNA and chromosomes all over the place. So the two cells that we're going to talk about are the plant and animal cell. And plant cells are also, we're going to talk more about protists and those sorts of things later in the year. So it's not just a plant cell, but for the most part, we're just going to call them plant cells. So this right here is an animal cell, and you can see the big difference right here on the outside. The plant cell is a bit thicker. The animal cell is not as thick. It's because the animal cell just has the cell membrane, and that cell membrane keeps bad things out and helps them to get bad things out, like garbage, and it brings good things in. It allows good things in. So just like your house and the school has doors to both keep people out and to let certain people in, the cell does the same thing because the cell needs to get nutrients, but it also needs to get rid of stuff and keep stuff out. Over here, though, the plant cell does have a cell membrane, but it's also got a thicker wall. And that's partly because plants don't have bones like you and I do. And so for them to be able to grow tall, they need to be able to have walls that provide a firm structure. And why do they need to grow tall? Because plants need to get the light. And if other plants grow taller than them, then they're competing for light and they might not survive. So plants also have a cell wall here on the outside. If we go further inside, we can see that we've got something that we have in a plant that we don't have in an animal. And that thing is a chloroplast. So the chloroplast right here is going to be something that helps the plants to undergo photosynthesis, which we'll talk about in the next video. This right here, this big thing, would be a vacuole. All right, that's going to be a vacuole. And if you see, the plant or the animal does not have a vacuole that is nearly as big. We would say that this little thing right here, we'd probably call that the vacuole in this plant. And the reason that it's so different is because in a plant, Plants are filled with lots and lots of water. They need, if you've ever bitten into celery, it's very crispy, it's got a lot of water in it. It's because their vacuoles store a lot of water. Water helps the plants in lots of different ways that we're not going to talk about at this time. So that's the vacuole. Over here, we'd probably say that that's the vacuole for the animal. Then we've got, let's see, we've got the same thing for the most part for everything else in plants and animals. Here we've got the mitochondria. You can see that it's the same. So some students get confused. They think that because plants have photosynthesis, that plants don't really need to get food. But photosynthesis makes the food. It doesn't break it down. That's the job of the mitochondria. So even though the plant does make food, it still needs the mitochondria to break it down. Just like if you make yourself breakfast, you still need your stomach, right? You still need your stomach to digest it. So mitochondria here, when I look at it, most pictures that you're going to see on different diagrams, it's going to look like, it reminds me of like if somebody's holding their muscles up, you see the bulges. You can't really see it here, but you can see it in the picture. You can see the bulges. It looks like almost somebody, you got a bunch of people who are standing and flexing their muscles because might, right? That lots of might. The mitochondria makes the power. It's the powerhouse of the cell, and it breaks down food. We've also got lots of little dots all over the place. You can see it in both here. Those are the ribosomes. And the ribosomes, the way that I remember those is that ribosomes, the first three letters are ribs. And I like eating ribs. A lot of you said that you liked eating ribs. And so when you make ribs on the grill, and ribs are just meat, you're really making protein. And what do ribosomes do? They make protein. So an easy way to remember ribosomes is that they make protein. And I also remember, like, how do you remember that they're the little dots all over the place? Because when you eat ribs, a lot of times, if you're eating them right, you're going to get kind of messy. You're probably going to get spots all over your shirt. And so that reminds me of ribs and ribosomes. The other part with proteins is this right here, this squiggly thing around the nucleus in both the plant and animal. And that squiggly thing is the endoplasmic reticulum. And so we just shorten that to the ER. And that makes it easy to remember because the ER, you've got good images of emergency rooms. And so I told you about the story about how my dad, he's very curious about ambulances and sirens and those sorts of things. So he always called ambulances meat wagons, right? Because they transport bodies or slabs of meat. And so when you think about that, right, going back to the meat example, we've got protein. Or you can also think of carrying them into the ER, not just the ambulance, but actually carrying things into the ER. How do people get from the ambulance into the hospital? Well, you've got people who carry them in. So what is the ER's job? It's to carry proteins. Ribosomes make them. Endoplasmic reticulum largely carries them. On the inside of both cells, you're going to see this blue goopy stuff, and that is called the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is important. It's I sort of call it, it's like packing peanuts in boxes, because you put packing peanuts in there to provide cushion and support, and some sort of structure. But you also, for a different analogy, if you think of a glass of water, when you drop a drop of food dye in there, all of a sudden that food dye just disperses all over the place. Right? That's sort of what happens in the cytoplasm. Because the cytoplasm is liquid, when some particle comes in there, it can just float through the cell and get to where it needs to get to. So it allows for transport and structure and support, some of the biggest things. Finally, we've got the nuclear membrane. Right, whenever we talk about a membrane, just like the cell membrane protects the cell, the nuclear membrane protects the nucleus. And so inside here, we've got the nucleus. And the nucleus is like the brain of the cell. I think you guys are very familiar with that. It's the brain of the cell, and it houses DNA and chromosomes, and it tells the cell what it needs to do. So these guys right here are cells. Now, you do have one-celled organisms. Prokaryotes are usually one-celled. Some eukaryotes are. But most of the time, eukaryotes are going to be multicellular. They're going to have many cells. So both the plant and animal cell would stack with each other. And when we stack cells with each other, when we group them together, they become tissues. When we group tissues together, they're going to become organs, like your liver, and those sorts of things. And finally, when we group, or not finally, but when we group organs together, we get systems, like your respiratory system, digestive system. And when we get all of our systems together, like our skin, our respiratory, our cardiovascular, then we get an organism. An organism is you. An organism is me. This is very similar to the idea of like organisms make populations, populations make communities, and communities make ecosystems. So a very similar thing, just on a smaller level. It's how we make organisms. So hopefully that was helpful to you. If you like my analogies, feel free to use them. But also come up with your own. Do whatever is going to help you. And I would recommend trying out a bunch of different pictures. Just search cells online to practice with different cells. Thank you. Have a great day and good luck studying.